Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Talkback today, which we are really excited about. We are going to be talking with director and documentarian Ben-Moshe, who is joining us from the UK, and which we did a lot of coordinating to make that happen. So thank you for being with us. And we are specifically going to be talking today about one of Danny's fantastic films, Shalom Bollywood, the untold story of Indian cinema. And the reason we are doing this talk and are going to be showing this film is it dovetails really wonderfully with our current exhibit, which is Beyond Borders, the art of Siona Benjamin. And Siona is part of the B'nai Israel community, a community that has been around for over 2,000 years. And while she's been in the United States, for 36 years plus, she was born and raised in what it was known as the Bollywood suburb of Bombay, now known as Mumbai. And also really fitting, and we'll get into more of why that is, some of the fundamental aspects to her work explore gender roles, and often through feminist ideologies or with a feminist twist, if you will. So with that, let's dive into talking about this really, really interesting film. And to kind of helping us get into that, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background as a documentary filmmaker?
Sure. So firstly, thank you for having me, and thank you for presumably watching the film or going to watch the film or giving people the option to watch the film. And if you do, or if you have, I hope you like it or will like it. So I'm from London originally, where I am now, because I'm just here working on another film, although I live in Melbourne, Australia. Lived in Israel for a few years, but as a documentarian, you kind of, you go where the story is. And so I spent several years making the Shalom Bollywood film. Sometimes people think, oh, what am I going to do tonight? I'm going to sit down and watch a film. And an hour and a half later, that wasn't bad. Do you want cheesecake or chocolate cake now? And the filmmaker has spent like a decade working what you just watched on, and which was the case with Shalom Bollywood for various reasons that I may or may not bore you with. So that took me to Mumbai several times. I think I went 5 times overall to make this film. I used to be an academic, working basically in a Jewish studies space, Israeli Jewish studies space, and it was kind of a circuitous route that led me to this story. And for a while, I started making films when I was still in academia, and then I was making more films, so I reduced my academic load, and ultimately I became a full-time creative a few years ago now.
That's so interesting and makes sense in terms of some of the next questions we're going to be asking. And I would assume from your, point of entry of interest, you've talked about this as being a story of history, a historical history, definitely infused with entertainment, but it's a story with historical significance. You also talked about being in Jewish studies, and you often tell Jewish stories. Beyond your study, what interests you about that, or why do you think it's important to tell Jewish stories?
If you were going to make a film, or write a book, or do any creative venture, or start a business, it's got to be something you're passionate about. Absolutely. Right? And it's got to be something you know something about, and and something that you feel compelled to or called to. And I can't explain why I have a passion for Jewish stories other than it being my own world, as opposed to someone approached me once and said, hey, we'll make a great documentary. And I said, what? A film about mobile phones? And I said, you know, I'm really happy to use one, but I'm not going to spend a few years making a documentary about that. You can pick anything. I'm sitting here with a pen, the history of a pen. It's probably changed civilization, right? It's just not my shtick, right? And so I guess it's filmmaking in many respects, like academia also as well in many respects. It's you exploring perhaps your own world, and it's an indulgence because it's things that you find really fascinating and complex and want to get to the heart of and the root of, that tell you something both about civilization as a whole, generally, the Jewish world in particular, and perhaps my own place in it as well. And, you know, there's sayings for everything, isn't there? But, you know, one of the film saying is like, you know, make a film about stuff you know. And whether it's for better or worse, intuitively or more consciously, I kind of know and am gripped and fascinated by the Jewish world. Not just, I made other stories. I made a story about a Chinese dissident. You know, I made a story about the 1960s, but they're all things that I think matter in some way, I care about in some way, I think are interesting in some way. But ultimately, yes, I constantly come back to the Jewish stuff.
Well, all of what you've said makes incredible sense. And talking about passion and interest and things that you know, did you know a lot about the history of Jews in India before you dove into this project? And if not, what was it that drew you in to want to learn more?
Well, you know, I've done a lot of interviews with this film, and in America, I did an interview with the Washington Post. I did an interview with Voice of America, and I just all around the world, I've done these things, and people go, so, you know, how did you must be very interested in Bollywood, and you must have studied the history of Bollywood. And like, no, actually, I'd never seen a Bollywood film in my life before I started making this film, and that wasn't the impetus for me making this film. And basically, I'd always known about Indian Jews. I had a friend with an Indian Jewish girlfriend when I was growing up here in London, and just I lived in Israel for a few years, and you know, you see communities of Indian Jews dressed like in traditional Indian garb, and so that was no big deal. But basically, what happened is I was running a university research institute, and one of my students and kind of researchers was an Indian and not Jewish. And she got into some difficulties with things, nothing major, and I helped her out. And again, it was nothing major. But then what I learned was that Indians have some sort of proclivity for sending what we in Yiddish would call schmutzkes or knickknacks or whatever it is. And her father was very grateful and kept sending these things from India to me. And it would be a nice key ring, a business card holder, and things I didn't need or want. It's very nice. Anyway, one day she knocked on my door and she came in. I've got something from my father for you. And I'm thinking, oh God, please stop, right? It's really unnecessary and I don't need it. And it's just a piece of paper. So that's odd. And she goes, oh, yeah, my dad knows you're Jewish, and it's an obituary for one of our most famous Jewish actresses. Jewish actresses, India. And it was a story about Nadira, the last of the Jewish greats who passed away. And well, yeah, basically the last of the Jewish greats who passed away. And I read this article and I thought, wow. At the time I was still a full-time academic, but I'd made my first documentary. And, you know, documentary filmmaking is a bit like a drug. You go, oh my God, I need to do more. And I was kind of looking for another story, and I thought, wow. And I discussed it with a couple of other filmmakers I got to know and made my first film with, and got some money to go to India to see if there's a story to tell, basically. And the story I was going to tell was that of Nadira, whose story is in the documentary. And I went there, And I kind of take a fairly anthropological approach to my filmmaking, which was dump myself in the community. I literally stayed in the synagogue complex. So see who I meet, see who I speak to, see where it takes me. And in that, someone said to me, oh yeah, Nadira, yes, you should also speak to so-and-so who's David's nephew. And I'm going, who's David? And they go, you know, Pramila just died. And I'm going, who's Pramila? Right. And every way I turned, there were more and more stories about Jews in Bollywood. And so it very quickly grew from a story about Nadira into something more diverse, ensemble. And ultimately, I went to tell this story about Jews in Indian cinema, which was curious. To me, that was curious. And I'm just attracted to the curious. And I had no idea of the communities and these individuals' significance in a defining way in terms of the genre of the world's largest film industry. I simply had no idea. And one of the things, and I didn't go out to capture that history because no one else did. I kind of, it was by default. But then I came to realize later on, I was getting a flight. As I mentioned, I live in Australia, and I was getting a flight to Israel. And I think I was in Hong Kong. And on the LL, as you get on the LL flight, they have like newspapers and magazines. And there was a magazine called Asian Jewish Life. And on the front of it, it said Jews in Indian cinema. And I thought, oh, fantastic. There's like research, I can get stuff here. Yeah. So I sit down on the plane, I open it up, and it's an article that's just lifted quotes from me from a range of other interviews I'd given. This is when I was still making the film. And I realized I kind of became this expert on Jews in Indian cinema by default. But I'm very, very grateful because I captured the history literally before it's gone. And let me give you an example of that. I went to RK Studios, the most famous studios in the history of Indian cinema, of Raj Kapoor, the great Indian filmmaker. And I was there and I interviewed his son, producer, director. And I said, and many of the Jewish stars were in this studio. And I said, listen, are there any posters or photos or anything? And he called someone, as you do in India, and went off. And I went into this room, and literally just lying around was the historical documents, original stills, posters, everything. And they were disintegrating. And he said, you can take what you like. And it felt like cultural theft. But I realized it was the only way I was going to culturally keep these things alive. Yes. And I've been meaning to, and still plan to, send them to Ken Robbins, who's a wonderful resource of information and a great collector of Indian Jewish, Judaica in general, and cinema stuff in particular. So I was lucky I did it when I did, because there were people like who you'll see in the film, Hyder Ali, you know, not an old man, but not a young man. And if I didn't capture the story when I did now, like Rishi Kapoor, who's in the film, who as a kid knew the Jewish stars, he's passed away. Yeah. It'll be gone from lived memory. So I'm glad. It would have been a different film had I made it now, and which is always the case. But I wouldn't have had the sources of information that were still live.
Well, clearly from what you've talked about, it, you know, and the magazine that you picked up in flight, it was a story that needed to be told, was looking to be told, was looking to be researched and have some light shined upon, if you will.
Yeah, for some reason it hadn't been, and it is a significant, it's a standout story because it's different. It's like, oh, tell a Jewish story. Oh, here's a story about someone who survived some sort of anti-Semitic disaster. Oh, here's a story about some form of cultural challenge, assimilation, religiousness, whatever it is. I'm not diminishing any of those stories. They're all very valid. I'm making a Holocaust story now, right? But you kind of, you know, and then there's something, Jews and Indian cinema, it's different, and it's fresh, and we need that from time to time.
Absolutely. And you know, when you talk about the narrative of Jewish people throughout history and their involvement in so many disciplines, this is really fascinating on many levels. You talked about in some of the interviews that I've read that you had done about the taboo nature of Hindu and Islamic women performing on screen when this, monumental cinema industry began about 100 years ago. And that was what evidently led to or opened the door for Jewish Indian women to step into this genre. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, in many respects, it's like Jewish history writ large. To some extent, often it's like accidental and is forced upon us. Why did we become the lawyers and the doctors and the bankers, right? Because we weren't allowed to do the kind of agricultural work, and we weren't allowed to do some of these other things, and finance was shunned upon, mercantile stuff. So it wasn't that the Jewish women of India were so brilliant and greater than the other women of India, but the cultural system and value system was different. Mm-hmm. So it was when Indian cinema started around 1913, that was really the first film, but there was some film stuff going on beforehand. When it started, it was taboo for Hindu and Islamic women to perform in public. But the Jewish community was much more liberal and much more educated. It was more tied globally and had seen films from around the world and was generally more progressive. It was part of that sort of Sephardi Middle Eastern Jewish tradition. The Jews had come from across the Middle East to settle in India from the 1600s. And because Jews were considered other Indians, part of the Anglo-Indian community, they were part of the elite with the British and the traders and stuff like that. And they were big traders themselves. So they were kind of traveling around the world and had people coming from around the world. So they were much more exposed to and familiar with and inclined towards modernity. So that taboo that pertained to the Hindu and Islamic women didn't pertain to the Jewish women. So when there was a need for someone to get up and perform on stage, no problem. So it was almost again by default that it happened. And in addition, and these are things I go into in the film, Indian Jews, the Baghdadi Indian Jews, there are three types of Indian Jews. There's Baghdadi, which is a community that migrated from the Middle East. There's the B'nai Israel, which date back a couple of thousand years. And then there's the Cochin Jews down in the famous Cochin synagogue. The female Jewish stars of Indian cinema are primarily Baghdadi Jews. Primarily, not exclusively, and they had lighter skin and they had higher cheekbones. So both the higher cheekbones went in with the look of American cinema, and the lighter skin was much better for the low light conditions of filmmaking at the time. So these kind of cinema gods aligned, and here we are to tell their story.
So interesting when you think about all the things that kind of aligned to to make this happen and to start this really incredible, interesting phenomenon.
But it's got to be said, while it was kind of accidental, if you like, these things came along, it still took, particularly all of the Jewish stars, but particularly the first one, Salochana, whose real name was Ruby Myers. She went where no other Indian woman had been before. This defines the term pioneer.
I was going to say, these are pioneering women.
It defines the term feminism. She was hauled before and I can't remember now, it's been so many years since I made the film and the last time I watched it, but she was hauled before a committee of parliamentarians and a censor committee, and because she was too raunchy, and she gave as good as she got, and she's the one who broke the taboo. and she's the one who everyone else swam in her wake. So, you know, we're talking about, it's interesting. I'm in England at the moment, and England's women's football team have just won the Euros. And it sounds like a completely different story. And everyone's going, wow, they've just changed the sort of our understanding in the UK of soccer, right?
Mhm.
Which is, you know, traditionally this man's game. And they've kind of, you know, broken new grounds, and which will affect everything for women playing football, soccer going forward. Well, Sulochana did that with cinema in India.
And it's all connected. It's all connected. It's all part of, that, the evolution and trying to make strides, for gender equality and recognition. So you've talked about, coming into this at a time when, some of these iconic stars have already, started to pass away or are getting old. And so at a point when you could really come in and document those stories and make sure that they are captured and preserved.
To be honest, they'd already all passed away, but, you know, I was able to find their children or close relatives who themselves might have been in their 70s, 80s. And then some of them have now passed away and they're in the film. They were able to give me film posters, film articles, film clips, as well as the first-hand tales of their parents or relatives and friends, without which I wouldn't know who they are. I may as well, just pick up a book and read what it says, and that's it, without the emotional, personal thing. So apart from finding the visual materials to tell a story, that film, I think it's 76 minutes long. And, every minute of filmmaking is a painful, excruciating process. How do you fill the screen in a visually engaging way? So I don't say that to say, wow, I made 76 amazing minutes. It was like, okay, I've told you the story of Jews in Indian cinema. I need the materials to bring that to life. I need archive to bring that to life. And without having those relatives and friends and family, I wouldn't have been able to do that. And already now, some of those people are no longer around.
Well, and not only, the necessity in making that connection so that there's that, palpable kind of resonance that occurs and it further invests you in this story and emotionally connects you, and then therefore hopefully the viewer down the line to this story. But I mean, you also captured stories that may have been lost, that may have been absolutely lost and never come to light.
And I am grateful. I'm grateful I did this, not just because I add another film to my filmography, or I get an opportunity to talk to people like you in parts of the world and I've done these literally all around the world that I wouldn't otherwise have contact with. I was again able to do justice to these incredible people who did incredible things. And that's what inspired me as an academic, inspires me as a filmmaker, is people who stand out and do something out of the ordinary. And I'm really, really glad, because were it to have been lost, once it's gone, it's gone, and it's too significant. And it happens. Things happen. I made a film. It's kind of a different story, but let me just explain. I made a film about my mum. It's called My Mother's Lost Children. And after I made that film, which did various channels around the world, I would get, and it was about family and family secrets and speaking and what have you. And I would get messages from complete random strangers who had seen it around the world saying, you've inspired me now, I'm going to speak to my mum, or I'm going to speak to my daughter, or I'm going to speak to whoever to tell them X, Y, or Z. And then I would get literally juxtaposed message, Twitter, Facebook, whatever it is, from talking complete strangers. And these are probably in the thousands, saying, oh, I realize I should have spoken. I should have documented. I should have told. and the moments passed. So, you know, again, I didn't plan that. It just happened when it did. And here we are.
What an incredible, you know, inspiration that you became, you know, for, you know, lighting a fire, a catalyst for, and, you know, it's something that we encounter in the museum, you know, when we have, you know, personal stories that are brought in, and we have then the ability to, you know, to share that. And it may have been material that had been in a box in someone's attic for decades, and, you know, had someone not opened the lid or, you know, gotten curious. Those are incredibly, you know, important, significant stories that would have been lost, that never would have been told. So, you know, the fact that you are inspiring others to go out and have those important conversations with friends and family, you know, to hear about their experiences, and you know, it's so important. So it's wonderful that was kind of a, you know, an offshoot of this project. So I want to ask you, you filmed this, obviously you spent some time in India, and while there have been strides made in terms of gender equality, it is a largely patriarchal culture to a certain extent. And you intentionally decided to tell, you know, some of these stories through the lens of these Jewish women. Was there, you know, any thought in how this might be accepted in terms of how you're choosing to share the stories?
I never made this film for an Indian audience because I wouldn't know how to communicate with an Indian audience. I'm a Western guy and a chronic Jew. That's it, right? Interestingly, I had to, and when the film premiered at the Mumbai International Film Festival, it was like, oh crap, Indians are going to see my film. And I made the film, you know, it's in tongue in cheek. It plays off the Bollywood themes, but in a fun way, right? Because it's all that ludicrous over the topness of Bollywood. But Bollywood is, right, but that's to me, and as an outsider, but Bollywood is sacrosanct in India. And so I made this film for a Western audience, to engage with a Western audience, to inform a Western audience, to entertain a Western audience, and a Jewish audience in particular. And I'm standing there, and people are lined up to go into the film at the festival, and local press and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, oh, what have I done? Like, I might have really just offended this cinema loving community and people who have paid good money to come along because they see it's a film about the history of Indian cinema. But what's really interesting is, firstly, they loved it. I mean, it then played at the Indian government's film festival of Goa, where it got a standing ovation. So I was very relieved. I didn't offend anyone. It won awards at like the at Indian film festivals in America. But Indian audiences related to it and understood it in a completely different way. So things that Western audiences would laugh at, Indians didn't. And the reaction, when you sit in an audience, you can feel the vibe of what works and works. Sure. And when someone laughs or is shocked or is moved, and the questions the audience answer are completely different. So the Indians saw it, and it through their own prism, and I guess took from it, you know, different things, and didn't see it as this kind of funny rift on, you know, the world's largest over-the-top film industry. Saw it in a much more historical kind of way, and they knew the characters. Like for a Western audience and for a Jewish audience, this is all new. Who's Pramila? Who's Miss Rose? Who's Uncle David? Who's etc etc etc? Who's Salochana? Who's Rishi Kapoor? Who's blah blah blah? It's all kind of new and fascinating. Indians go, they would stand up and they would go, in the film blah blah blah, and they'd start telling me stuff. They knew it. right? They knew these characters, but generally didn't always know they were Jewish. And then they would tell me more stories. And this is always the way as a filmmaker. After the film comes out, you get contacted and people have more information.
Yeah.
So it was a different thing. And I was very pleased. I've done many forums now with distinguished institutes and things like that in India, where they've shown the film and again relate to it in a different way too, which I can only assume your audience, you people out there, will.
What a wonderful experience, and how interesting to have made it, for a Western audience, but to have had that opportunity and to see how it was accepted and the different ways that it resonated with that Indian community, and probably, the nostalgia that, it brought up. And this is, as you said, a huge industry that is woven into that culture. So that connection was made on a completely different level, but everyone, takes away what they connect with. And obviously this film has the ability to connect across, many cultural lines, which is incredible.
Yes, luck rather than skill on my part, but I would still accept it.
So want to just ask a few more questions. So you had said that you really didn't know much about this narrative before you started making the film. On the other side of the project, were there anything that was particularly interesting or that really surprised you during the making of the film?
Yeah, I went in like as kind of like Western white dude. And the first question I asked every Indian Jew on camera was, tell me about your experience of anti-Semitism. And they would look at me, and some said, what's anti-Semitism? And some said, well, why would I have any anti-Semitism? And there was this whole other story that I never really got to tell, which is, India is this land, this unique place in the world without anti-Semitism, because, in the West, which I figure is because, to my 2 cents, in the Western world, it stems from deicide, the apparent killing of Jesus. Well, firstly, we never did that to any, well, we didn't do that to Jesus, but we didn't do it to any allegedly Indian gods. Secondly, is this whole kind of, our monotheism. And in India, they lost count of how many gods there are. So what's another one, right? There's no competition. They've got so many gods. And I don't mean that facetiously. I mean it, quite literally. And also there's this notion of shanti, or which is a bit like shalom, and it's this openness. Mm-hmm. So I went to a location, a B'nai Israel Indian site, and there are all these people there singing Hebrew psalms and lighting candles. And I go, oh, wow, there's still Jews who live there. And they go, no, they're just the locals, right? There's this kind of cross-fertilization of culture in India. Now, I think that has unfortunately been set back by Modi's, more nationalistic approach, the current Prime Minister. But so that was definitely a big surprise to me, and a very positive experience.
So interesting. So maybe, there's some time has passed since you've made this film. These last several years around the world, particularly, in the US though, too, there have been some, socio-political, events that have really shaken things up.
Very diplomatically put, yeah.
So this has also been called the time of the woman. And so I really was thinking a lot about that in kind of looking at these pioneering women and some of the barriers that they broke through and how you chose to tell this story. Do you think through, coming through the experiences or that we're still going through, has that shined a new light on this narrative in any way?
I think a couple of things. I think it is a dimension of that, when if whatever is going on in our civilization, socio-cultural, economic, political, it's a mosaic, isn't it? It's like a jigsaw with all these pieces. This is one piece that adds to that discussion. Probably, I mean, I started making this film in 2006, 5, 6, something like that. I think I started in 2005. I went to India for the first time in 2006. I finished it in 2016. It came out in 2017. Probably if I went off now, and this is in itself a cultural thing of our time, to make the story of the women of Indian cinema, I would probably be told I can't make it, or it would be inappropriate for me to make it, right? Because I'm male. And therefore this should have a female director and a female writer, etc., etc. I get all of that, and you know, but it wasn't. It was 2005, 2006, and I'm the one whose place it ended up on, and hopefully I you know did justice to their story. Yeah, but it does strike me in cultural terms that probably I would not be supported to make a film a women's story today, which is curious.
Okay, so I'm going to pose a final question related here. So with all of that in mind, what you've just talked about, what do you hope audiences take away from the film?
That's a good and interesting question. I hope they take away that there are many stories out there that we don't know and that are worth knowing. And there are many characters out there. Sometimes we kind of, you know, go think, oh, we know this is our world, and we lack for inspiration. But there are these inspirational kind of characters out there. And we understand as well that we live in a world with the nuances of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And it is through that diversity, through the fertility of that diversity, that kind of, through that cross-fertilization, that incredible things kind of can happen, that we can find inspiring, and that we can still be very safe and sure and strong and self-identifying and have our place as Jews. And that as Jews, given our own, you know, unfortunately, and forgive me, you know, we had a chat before, we were recording before, I'm not that familiar with your community, and every community is different. But that we shouldn't be afraid as a people to say we are a people and these are our constraints and characteristics and values, etc. But we can still have a major input in our own unique way into the broader community, both of nations and society that we're a part of. And ultimately, I hope people have a entertaining, eye-opening hour and a quarter.
Well, I have no doubt that that is absolutely the case. So I just want to thank you so much, Danny, for spending time talking to us about this interesting project. You're a globetrotter. You've got your hand in a lot of pots. You've always got something going on. Before we wrap up, any tidbits you want to drop about projects on the horizon?
Well, maybe the best thing is advert time. It's easier, you know, if people want to watch any of my other films, or follow for future films or stay in touch, if you go to www.identity-films.com, that's hyphen the line in the middle, identity-films.com. On there, all my films, usually with links where you can watch them. And then there's the Facebook link and the Twitter link and the Vimeo link, or if someone's got something specific they want to ask or know, they should feel free to send me a message through any of that. And if you lovely viewers do that too, and you watch something and enjoy it, I'm very glad, and I hope you do, and let me know.
Fantastic. We will be sure to share that information because you are an amazing storyteller and will be, I'm sure, continuing to tell entertaining, engaging, important stories for many, many years to come. So our audience will want to get a beat on you. So thank you so much, Danny, again. And we will look forward to hopefully talking with you again in the future.
Yes, I hope so. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for dedicating time, the half or so hour to this. Thanks for dedicating an hour and a bit to the documentary. That is appreciated. And I hope we'll meet again.
And as you sign off with all of your emails, cheers. Thank you. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.